Second, the King James Version follows the contents of the ancient text closer than most other translations, and by using older language features, the translators rendered the originals into an English language that by its older word or grammar forms gives the sacred text the dignified and divine, or divine, D-E-V-I-N-E, distance they deserve and other modern translations lack. Third, the King James Version follows the contents of the ancient text much closer because the old forms of the second person singular are used. The word thou is a second person singular pronoun in English. It is now largely archaic, having been replaced in most contexts by you. It's like old, really, really old, outdated, hardly used, never used, because it's been replaced in most contexts by you. The equalization of these two originally distinct pronouns can cause misunderstanding as to who is meant, either you as a single person or you as a group of people, which in Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek and almost all other languages in the world is a big difference in form and sound of the relevant pronoun. In order to reflect the stark distinction found in biblical Hebrew, Aramaic and Greek, the translators of the King James Version showed the older singular second person pronoun and verb forms by using thou, thee, thy and thine for singular, and ye, you, your and yours for plural. Thou is the nominative form, the oblique / objective form is the THEE, functioning as both accusative and dative. The position is thy, the possessive is thy, adjective, or thine, adjective before a vowel or pronoun, and the reflexive is thyself. Using thou is also reflected in the use of the verb that follows this pronoun. The verb of the second person singular end with dash est. A few end only with dash t, such as art, wilt and shalt. In Bible text there is also another form for the verb in third person singular. In modern English, a verb that follows he, she, it just ends with s. But in 1611, when the King James Version was first published, all those verbs ended with e or eth, eth or eth, and so do they still today in church services. And it goes on, leads up to Bible English. At first some readers might find the uses of the old pronouns and their verbs difficult, but very soon you will get used to it and you'll perhaps even enjoy the colourful language from the past. Another feature which might irritate at first might be the sometimes different word order. Instead of I do not know, in older texts we find I know not, sleepeth he not, means does he not sleep, etc. The authors have chosen to present here the text of the original King James Version, although it contains a few minor mistranslations. Okay, so the original King James Version contains a few minor mistranslations. So anyone out there says it's infallible, it's irrefutable, or basically if they say it has no contradiction, has no errors, mistakes or anything like that, well, they're wrong. According to these people, these authors, it had minor mistranslations, especially in the Old Testament where the knowledge of the Hebrew, Aramaic and Syriac languages was uncertain at the time. Yeah, because they probably weren't natural, were native born Aramaic speakers. Just some examples. Among the most commonly cited errors is in the Hebrew of Job and Deuteronomy, where re'em, with the probable meaning of wild ox or ox, is translated in the King James Version as unicorn, following in this the Vulgate unicornus and several medieval rabbinic commentators. Otherwise, the translators on several occasions mistakenly interpreted a Hebrew descriptive phrase as a proper name, or vice versa, as at 2 Samuel 1:18, where the book of Jasher, or Yasha, properly refers not to a work by an author of that name, but should rather be rendered as the Book of the Upright. In the New Testament we find Jesus' father referred to as carpenter, although in original Greek we read the word tekton, which means most certainly builder, just like tectonics means pertaining or belonging to building, or to have relevance to building of the earth. Another misinterpretation is the word betray or betrayal in texts that describe the action of Jesus' disciple, Judas. And Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went on to the chief priest to betray him unto them. Mark 14:10. The original Greek text, however, does not use the word betray, but hand over. Looking at the fight between Christianity and Judaism, we can assume that this misinterpretation was deliberately created in order to discredit anything that has to do with the words Judas, Jude, Judaism, Judea, Judaean, anything that has Jew in it, right? From Old French, Jew, Judaeus, and so forth. And after the sinister Roman Christian anti-Jewish propaganda, all similar words, is today a synonym for treachery, satanic, devilish, and evil. Listeners should feel unwell when hearing these words. The Islamic anti-Jewish propaganda in their so-called perfect book, the Quran, including all other Islamic texts against the Jews, has taken this Pauline Christian propaganda unchecked and uncriticised as basis of their own bigotry. This single misinterpretation led to almost 2,000 years of Jewish suffering and ultimately to the Holocaust in Hitler's Nazi Europe with more than 6 million dead Jews. Okay, we have different opinions on that. We're not going to express them here. As for all other scriptures, it's according to fact, right? Statistics at that time. As for all other scriptures, we have chosen to include the authors have, into the Grand Bible, all those translations that follow the above outlined grammar and translating principles. Description of this book. The Grand Bible has been published in the form of one volume. The authors have decided, or the compilers, to do that for very good reasons. They live in the era of information, or we live in the era of information. Free access to all sorts of information seems to be guaranteed. However, up to now, religious organisations and the political power base could be quite sure that most critics, believers and worshippers would not check the religious texts thoroughly for the very simple reason that they could not find them. Most of the texts may be available even online, but as countless different places of the Most of the texts may be available even online, but in countless different places of the unpenetrable internet jungle. Many documents bear several different names, so do the authors. Often there are several different translations in circulation too. The overwhelming mass of all those ancient documents and manuscripts is breathtaking. For any amateur, it is almost impossible to find all texts, either online or offline. That is why the authors or the compilers of this particular book have been doing this tedious work for you, or for all. It took several years to collect that vast amount of material and figure out what is what. Lots of this material is published by scholars and scientists. Unfortunately, those academics are not in the habit of using a vocabulary that every interested reader can understand. So they had to bear in mind that scientists do not publish their books for the common public, but for gaining recognition from other academics. Therefore, whenever possible, they have used a clear and understandable form of English in their explanatory text. Lord Henfield, The Grand Bible Commission, 2018. The Grand Bible. Introduction. What is Scripture in general? Religious texts, the revered text or Holy Writ, are also known as Scripture or Scriptures, from the Latin word scriptura, meaning writing, are texts which religious traditions consider to be central to their practice or beliefs. Religious texts may be used to provide meaning and purpose, evoke a deeper connection with the divine, convey religious truths, promote religious experience, foster communal identity, and guide individual and communal religious practice. The Encyclopaedia Britannica says about Scripture: Scriptures comprise a large part of the literature of the world. This Encyclopaedia Britannica is like over 250 years old. So it should be trusted, right? It probably is trustworthy. They vary greatly in form, volume, age, and degree of sacredness, but the common attribute is that their words are regarded by the devout as sacred. Sacred words differ from ordinary words in that they are believed either to possess and convey spiritual and magical powers, or be the means through which a divine being or other sacred reality is revealed in phrases and sentences full of power and truth. Characteristics. Most sacred scriptures were originally oral or verbal and were passed down through memorization from generation to generation until they are finally committed to writing. A few are still preserved orally, such as the hymns of the American Indians, now being recorded by anthropologists. Many bear the unmistakable marks of their oral origin and can best be understood when recited aloud. In fact, it is still held by many Hindus and Buddhists that their scriptures lack, when read silently, the meaning and significance they have when read aloud or recited aloud. For the human voice is believed to add to the recited text dimensions and truth and power not readily grasped by the solitary reader. Types of sacred literature vary in authority and degree of sacredness. The centrally important and most holy of the sacred texts have in many instances been gathered into canons, standard works of the faith, which after being determined, either by general agreement or by official religious bodies, become fixed, for example, limited to certain works that are alone viewed as fully authoritative and truly beyond all further change or alteration. The works not admitted to the canons, those of a semi-sacred or semi-canonical character, may still be quite valuable as supplementary texts. You could probably consider that in regards to the Gnostic text, or the Lost Gospels, etc. The terms sacred text and religious texts are not necessarily interchangeable, in that some religious texts are believed to be sacred because of their nature as divinely or supernaturally revealed or inspired, whereas some religious texts are simply narratives pertaining to the general themes, practices, or important figures of the specific religion, and not necessarily considered sacred by itself. The other way around is also true. The Confucian texts are also viewed as sacred, although they do not mention the divine or religion at all. Analysis. All these texts cannot be edited, additionally supplemented, or any other way changed. One core function of scriptures is making them sacred by the ceremonial and liturgical role, particularly in relation to sacred time, the liturgical year, the divine efficacy, and subsequent holy service. In a more general sense, its performance. A more logical definition is: Scripture is the text or writing that supports a belief system and its doctrines. A sacred text or scripture has not necessarily anything to do with God or gods. There are sacred scriptures that do not mention God at all. So what then is scripture, and what does it contain? This is a very important question, because its answer defines what a holy text is about. After thorough analysis, we surely see that a sacred text can talk or not talk about divinity, just like the Bible. It can include narratives, parables, allegories, visions, history, philosophy, poetry, sayings, myths, legends, biographical notes, polemicism, racism, nationalism, phrases, doctrine, dogma, piety, verses, advice, precepts, commandments, law, rules, wisdom, quotes, propaganda, psychological and educational matters, astronomy, metaphysics, political ideology, typology, and repetitions. This is quite a lot of different stuff, and the older the text, the greater is the diversity of this material. We need to put it in order. It needs to be put in order. Then they go through a lot of different scripture that when we go through a lot of different scripture that even may have distinct origins, we will see very soon that there is a general pattern. Not the general pattern of the US Army, but a general pattern. The topic God is only sporadically touched. God appears in most cases only as repetitive phrases such as "and God said," and "the Lord answered," "in the name of God the merciful and beneficent," etc. Most of these phrases are empty. There is no analysis as to who or what God might be. Depending on linguistical, cultural, geographical, political and historical background, all those sacred texts have one thing, a crucial item in common: the law. The law, the rules, the precepts or commandments define the belief system and subsequently its doctrines. Religion and other belief systems are made by man. It is never the other way around. A writer of scripture brings his own experience into play, his suffering, his failures and successes, his faults as well as his knowledge. This is reflected very much in religions such as Buddhism or Buddha seem to have a peaceful man, a do-gooder. Who was willing to listen and to learn. Buddhism reflects this ethic attitude. A sharp contrast would be Muhammad, who was only peaceful in Mecca where he had no power. After the death of his wife, he became violent and inhumane. Both his peaceful time and his violence became the dualistic pattern of Islam. With the Grand Bible, the reader has for the very first time in history all material in his hand to analyse the facts solemnly by himself. Many religious communities claim that their sacred texts come from God. Islam even arrogantly claims the scripture to be absolutely perfect and unique. Just compare the laws of Islam with those laws from their direct predecessor Judaism and with the law of its predecessor, the law code of Hammurabi, and you will quickly find out that the successors have ruthlessly stolen whole sets of ideas from their predecessors. There is nothing divine in the covenant of Moses and his 10 commandments, as they have their origin thousands of years earlier in a civilization called Sumer. Claims of perfection and divinity of a scripture can break a religious doctrine's neck. The writers of the Quran have imprudently taken everything they could get from the scripture of Judaism and Christianity. Jesus is the most important prophet in Islam, right after Muhammad himself. Now it seems to become clearer and clearer that the first Christian scripture, the oldest Gospels and Epistles, was probably a literary invention of Roman authors of the Flavian dynasty, 69 to 96 AD. This is the very reason why Jesus was not mentioned by anyone before the time of Flavius Josephus' first publication, the Jewish War in 75 AD. Manuscripts. In this introduction, the authors wanted to focus on facts and data. The study of biblical manuscripts is important because handwritten copies of books can contain errors. The science of textual criticism attempts to reconstruct the original text of books, especially those published prior to the invention of the printing press in 1450. A biblical manuscript is any handwritten copy of a portion of the text of the Bible. The Aleppo Codex from around 920 AD and Leningrad Codex around 1008 AD were once the oldest known Hebrew language manuscripts of the Tanakh. In 1947 AD, the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran pushed the manuscript history of the Tanakh back a millennium from the two earliest complete codices. Before this discovery, the earliest extant manuscripts of the Old Testament were in Greek, in manuscripts such as Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus. Out of the roughly 800 manuscripts found at Qumran, 220 are from the Tanakh. Every book of the Tanakh is represented except for the book of Esther. However, most are fragmentary. Notably, there are 2 scrolls of the book of Isaiah, one complete IQISA and one around 75% complete IQISB. These manuscripts generally date between 150 BC to 70 AD. The oldest manuscripts were written in the form of scroll, Old Testament text. Texts of the New Testament were written on single sheets of papyrus, vellum, parchment or pergament, and strapped into bundles of documents which often were put into a kind of leather folder similar to a modern briefcase. Some medieval manuscripts were written in the form of codex, that is, folded sheets. Manuscripts earlier than the 13th century are very rare. The majority of the manuscripts have survived in a fragmentary condition. The earliest sources, whether oral or written, of the Hebrew Bible disappeared over time because of the fragility of media, wars, especially the destruction of the first and second temples, and other intentional destructions. As a result, the lapse of time between the original manuscripts and their surviving copies is much longer than in the case of the New Testament manuscripts. The first list of the Old Testament manuscripts in Hebrew, made by Benjamin Kennicott, 1776 to 1780, and published by Oxford, listed 615 manuscripts from libraries in England and on the continent. Giovanni de Rossi, 1784 to 1788, published a list of 731 manuscripts. The main manuscripts discovered in modern times are those of the Cairo Geniza around 1890 and the Dead Sea Scrolls 1947. In the old synagogue in Cairo were discovered 260,000 Hebrew manuscripts, 10,000 of which are biblical manuscripts. There are more than 200 biblical manuscripts among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of them were written in the Paleo-Hebrew, Phoenician alphabet. They were written before the year 70 AD. 14 scroll manuscripts were discovered in Masada in 1963 to 1965. That's where they had that massive massacre, right? Where the people they committed suicide or something. But we believe that's not true. It's got this funny feeling it's not true. If they left a woman alive that was pregnant and had a child, they might have worked on it. The Romans, aggro because they couldn't get up there for 3 or 4 days because it was so really fortified, and plus these people occupying it were throwing rocks at them and all that sort of stuff. Really gave them a hard time. They would have been cheesed off, and them being savage, they would have probably killed them. We're not sure, that's just the thought we had. Not definite on that. The New Testament has been preserved in more manuscripts than any other ancient work of literature, with over 5,800 complete or fragmented Greek manuscripts catalogued, 10,000 Latin manuscripts, and 9,300 manuscripts in various other ancient languages, including Syriac, Coptic, Armenian, Ethiopic, Slavic, and Gothic. The dates of these manuscripts range from around 125 AD to the introduction of a book printing by Johannes Gutenberg in the 15th century. The origin of the Bible codices. The great uncial codices, or 4 great uncials, are the only remaining uncial codices that contain or originally contained the entire text of the Greek Bible, Old and New Testament. Only 4 great codices have survived to the present day: Codex Vaticanus, Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Alexandrinus, and Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus. Although discovered at different times and places, they share many similarities. They are written in a certain uncial style of calligraphy, using only majuscule letters, written in scriptio continua, meaning without regular gaps between words. Though not entirely absent, there are very few divisions between words in these manuscripts. Words do not necessarily end on the same line on which they start. All these manuscripts were made at great expenses of material and labour, written on vellum by professional scribes. They seem to have been based on the most accurate texts in their time. All of the 4 great uncials uppercase letter script were written in Greek and on fine vellum, with the leaves arranged in quarto form. The size of the leaves is much bigger than in papyri codices. The first 2 codices are original Constantinian. Codex Vaticanus, he's got all the measurements there of the 3 different codexes, and other single manuscripts of significance. Origin of the Bible sources. Large parts of the Bible and subsequently the Quran can be traced back to far older sources. The 2 main sources are the clay tablets from Mesopotamia, that would be the cuneiform tablets, 3,000 years older than the Bible, and the papyri from Egypt, important manuscript collections on clay tablets. Most of them were made between 3000 BC and 400 BC. Up to now, almost 2 million tablets have been excavated, of which only approximately 5% have been read or published. These are the biggest ancient collections. Nineveh Library of Ashurbanipal, Iraq, cuneiform tablets. Ashur Library, Akkadian, 23,000 cuneiform tablets. Nippur Library, the Jurhem Library, Gursu Sipar Nuzi Mari Library in Syria, and Persepolis Library in Iran, Hattusa Library, Turkey. So around the Fertile Crescent, the Middle East. From there. Other significant sources. Important manuscript collections on papyrus, vellum, parchment, paper, bamboo, panels, or other materials. Up to now, several 100,000 manuscripts or fragments have been found. These are the biggest ancient collections. Qumran Library, Israel, in Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, etc. 981 manuscripts. 300 BC to 68. Elephantine Papyri, Egypt, in Aramaic. Oxyrhynchus, in Egypt, in Coptic, Greek, Latin. Nag Hammadi Library, Codex Sarkikos, in Coptic, and so forth. Many more documents have been found in all libraries of the world. It will take decades to read and translate all found documents, and we can expect that many more documents will be found. As for religious doctrine, they will probably contain texts that are unwelcome by religious rulers. So maybe AI will be developed so well that it could just read all of them and translate all of them, something like that. Probably, possibly. Make the process faster. Maybe. What is religion? We have to ask this question because before the Renaissance, the word was virtually unknown. Part 3. Take 1, whatever. What is religion? We have to ask this question because before the Renaissance, this word was virtually unknown. The word religion comes from a Latin word which means to bind oneself. And a person binds oneself to the way of life given and followed by his community of faith. We could also answer, a religion is a set of beliefs that is held by a group of people, but this is not enough because we still do not know what this term contains. Yeah, we came across somebody that actually said it means, it's like a meaning not defined. Certain people don't want it defined. That means you're bound to, you're bound by this religious text, these religious texts of a religion, etc., etc.